My screen with my mute button disappeared, and sometimes it's hard to find. But I'm back, and welcome everybody, and good morning, Michael. How are things in Tejas?
That's wonderful. Wonderful, thanks. Can you hear me all right?
Loud and clear.
Good.
What's on your mind for today?
Hearing you all well, and
we're rocking.
We're having a joyous time in Missouri.
We are. It's cooled down. When we got here to Missouri, it was in the 90s, and it's now down in the high 70s, low 80s, so much nicer.
Nice. It has cooled here just within the last 24 hours, so that's great. Going to be 80s outlook for the next week. We'll definitely take that. Much nicer.
Awesome.
So, been enjoying the Book of Thomas. That's something I had not looked into before. It's quite a different take. Nice.
Yes.
Refreshing.
I'm in agreement with you on that.
Now, I like what you had mentioned, that's likely what it presents is likely why it's not in the popularized versions today.
Well, it's really stated in the scriptures pretty clearly, there was a secret teaching. And he didn't give it to everybody. And, of course, he couldn't give it to everybody because, he said he wanted to. He said, there's so many things I want to say, but you can't hear them. You don't have the eyes to see, the ears to hear. You don't have the brain cells yet. So he speaks to the disciples. He says, I'm giving you straighter goods, but everybody else is getting it in parables.
That's amazing, and yesterday's show and what you had just mentioned brings up some thoughts I've had for a while. So may I jump right in?
Go for it. I'm ready to rock.
Okay. A situation, I want to take this little situation in my life and then, if we have time, expound it onto the world scene. But it had a situation with a delivery company bringing, packages to my home that I order. And I'm living, a fairly remote area. It's not, highly populated. And
right.
Many times over the past couple of years, and I didn't log out every time, but it's over 50%. Our packages are damaged, and a lot of times the goods are damaged. I have to call the company. It's just a little bit of a hassle. So, putting that in perspective with what you've been speaking about and have talked about perception. Now, I am seeing this situation continue and realizing what I've learned from the shows, that I've created this. I have somehow, this is my thinking, drawn this to me. Would that be correct?
Well, there's a reason why, if something less than love comes up in my mind, it comes up, and that's because it's there. And I will tend to resonate circumstances to me that will bring it up. But are you responsible for the fact that the delivery service in a particular area of Texas is poor? No, I don't think so. I wouldn't go that far.
I appreciate that. And why I thought about this, I was telling a dear friend of mine about the situation here in Texas, and it was presented to me, well, have you considered just picturing in your mind the next time you have a package, it being in perfect condition and everything's fine? And I thought about that. I said, whoa, I have not. So that brings another question. I mean, that is a good thought. I appreciated that being presented to me. And
Yes.
could that be why this situation is continuing to happen? I haven't done that. And I think, and I'd certainly like to hear what you say, I think that would be a good thing to put in my mind. It's positive energy. That's a good way to go, right?
I'd certainly support you in that. And
Okay.
and can that have an impact on the delivery service? Absolutely. You've heard me talk before about years ago when I used to keynote at Global Science Conference, and there was a fellow named Marcel Vogel who brought a fellow who's a 23-year senior scientist from IBM. I mean, a real science techie kind of guy. And he brings this camera called a Delaware camera that has a tuning mechanism. It's not like a regular camera where you just flip the shutter and, whatever's in front of it in the way of light energy is registered on the plate, but there's a tuning mechanism, and you can tune, like you tune a radio tuner, to different frequencies. And if that frequency were in front of the camera when you flip the shutter, then that energetic pattern would show up on the photographic plate. So, for instance, he showed pictures of taking a picture of an acorn with the Delaware camera, and what shows up on the photographic plate is an oak tree, if it's tuned to the right frequency. It's like, well, how is that possible? Well, obviously, in the acorn is an oak tree. I mean, it's pretty simple. Nobody's ever planted an acorn and gotten a Volkswagen or an apple tree or a rose or a snake. Every time you plant an acorn, you get an oak tree. So obviously, somewhere in there is a pattern for the oak tree. It takes the light, the water, the soil, and it builds according to some sort of an image or stored energy field within the acorn. And, if you can attune to it, obviously you could take a picture of it. Perfectly sensible. The upshot of his presentation was, here are the pictures of the high energy waves that leave the mind when we think a thought. And a lot of people, when it comes to energy and resonance, are pushed and pulled by the energetic patterns around them. Someone who has a negative bent, sending out a negative energy, is going to tend to, if the person in front of them, whatever the behavior is, whatever the circumstance is, if the person in front of them tends to have a negative bent, then there's going to be resonance. There's going to be a tendency for that to come forward. And unless that person is very conscious of what's going on inside themselves and in charge of their own minds, then they're going to tend to follow the pattern that's there. So to me, it would make perfect sense that if I'm really in pain or upset or disturbed about these packages are always damaged, I'm going to tend to energetically support getting packages that are always damaged. If I can shift that energy, now, I can shift my energy to the absolute perfect image of the packages being delivered perfectly, and it may not make the slightest bit of difference because the people involved there isn't a resonance for that energy, and they're not going to be influenced by it. On the other hand, if I happen to have a driver that, he normally doesn't pay much attention, but he gets this other energetic input, and there is nothing in the physical world that we know of that can stop the high energy waves that leave them on we think a thought. So if the driver on my route happens to have a streak of integrity in him, and energetically I can touch that, then his behaviors may change according to the inclination resonated in him from what I've sent him. You'd have to be pretty profoundly powerful to have some sort of absolute control. Don't know anybody that powerful. Yeshua had a pretty good record of it, but
that's true. That's true. I appreciate that, and these are along the lines that I was thinking. It's good to hear that, and I'm about to the point. I'm going to make a statement. I'd love to hear what you think. As I'm deeply thinking about many of these things, this delivery situation, other things happen in life that you face, and the more I consider this, the more I am alert and aware of these situations happening. I would almost say that everything less than ideal that might be going around in my world, that might be coming around in my world, is there to awaken me and alert me to change thinking.
I'd go with that. You've heard me say it many times. The purpose of life, if we hold a disease energy, to me, life abhors death. Life is here to support life. So if someone is carrying a disintegrative or a death energy, then life is going to, through not any magical or mystical means, just through resonance. If there's a low-level energy in someone, and there's somebody in the neighborhood with a similar low-level energy, they're probably going to cross paths. And when they do, the condition in one mind is going to tend to resonate the similar condition in the other mind. And unless the other mind is very conscious, it's going to tend to play that out. Now, again, we're talking about tendencies. We're not talking about absolutes. But we can have a pretty profound impact. And, of course, the closer we are to someone in relationship, let's say we're in relationship with someone we've exchanged genes with. Mm-hmm. That is, we've had sexual intercourse. There's a whole different level of resonance and connected energy between those two people than, some guy walking by the house. And a whole different level of impact of expectation and goals. So recognizing we live in a resonance universe and we're creators, then when I'm willing to take 100% responsibility. Now, I may not have even the smallest amount of responsibility in this situation. But when I'm willing to entertain that perhaps I have 100% responsibility, then if there's a part of my mind that I've hidden from myself, in owning responsibility, I'm going to be able to find and change that part of my mind. If I'm always in denial, look what they do to me, look what they do to me, they do it, they do it, they do it, then living in denial, the part of my mind that I could repair that might influence and bring a change is just not accessible to me. And, of course, that's one of the purposes of the forgiveness worksheet process, the reality management, is to collapse into the hidden parts of the mind and clean them out. And you can, you do that through choice and volition rather than waiting for somebody to come and kick you in the limitation. But you can rest assured that every energy that you hold, whether it's yours personally or something that came down the genetic line, every disintegrative energy that you hold, somebody, somewhere, is going to kick you right there. Is going to play that out for you. And we'll do one of two things. We'll live out of pretty much a universal religion that a lot of people are very committed to. Even the atheists are committed to this one, and that is the one world universal religion of blame. And so when that happens, a person goes into this big blame conversation, and now in denial, they dissociate from the part of their mind that drew it and that is in need of healing. The person who goes in the other direction says, I'm 100% responsible for this. Let me look and see if I can find even the slightest energy in me that's influencing this. And now my evidential mind, seeing as I've given it permission, can then show me what it is I need to deal with. Mm-hmm. And circumstances change. And I'll just say that, from years of, over 50 years now of working with people, I've just seen so many people whose lives were filled with tragedy and trauma and turmoil and loss and deprivation and health challenges, that when they said, okay, I'm going to take 100% responsibility, I'm going to start to change my mind, moved out of that state into a state where, hey, life is serving me pretty well. And I've seen that happen consistently enough that I'm in the space where I believe it's 100% accurate that we are creators and we have an influence on everything that happens. Not necessarily control, but an influence.
Mm-hmm. No, it's so relieving in many ways. It might be difficult to begin to work through it, as it was for me back a few years ago, but it's relieving on the other end, and it's coming easier and easier to speak about it, to live through it, to think through it, and work through it.
Exactly.
I remember back, some conversations we had real early on, and I used to take part in activism and things along that nature to a little degree. It wasn't, nationwide or anything, but I really got to grasp early on that is more than likely perpetuating the problem, and not to fuel the fire, in other words, and think through it differently. So I bring that back full circle to the delivery company, which I have called, and maybe 20 years ago I would have had a much different attitude with them. It's a loving attitude, and can we do something about this, folks? It's not pleasant to receive broken items, and I'm still the understanding is that if we're presenting things in the most loving manner that we know how, then we are not we're not throwing fuel on the fire. We're working towards coming to some kind of understanding with the company, with each other, for a better world. Would that be reasonable?
I would go with that, and there are some situations when you recognize vibration and energy, there are some situations where you might be dealing with someone who is not going to offer any form of attention or shift or change if you just maintain that totally serene voice and space. I've seen situations where my inclination was to crank up the volume to get somebody's attention because there was no interest in paying attention to anything else. But of course, I always have to look at what my motivation is and be in touch with what's going on inside of me. And you never know what the root of the inclinations are that move us in the direction of something that's less than love. But can I maintain this connectedness to this space of love? And that's oftentimes that's the challenge of life.
Oh, the results are so much more beautiful, so much more comforting, and it's great.
And healthier. Because everything that goes on in our minds goes on in our bodies.
Yeah, we're creating that, as you mentioned earlier. We're creating all of the chemicals within that either break us down or build us up.
Exactly. In that opening phrase in the book of John, where it doesn't say in the beginning was the Word and the Word became flesh, but rather in the beginning was the mind energy, and the mind energy became flesh. That literally our thoughts become our physiology, and there's no separation between what we call the body and the mind. They're one and the same.
It didn't take me long to latch onto that, coming from a bit on the health arena and realizing the difference between the placebo effect and the nocebo effect. I mean, it's
right.
Quite clear. It's quite clear, and it's just amazing to think through it and reason with it. But at the end, we're creating it. So bringing that full forward to our present-day world situation. And so I see my little world with the packages and what's happening, and now I'd like to explore with you this world, and we see that we have the political scene, the dominance, the tyranny, and how that is created collectively. How are we doing that collectively? Just looking for some clear thoughts on that. And, you know, going back, you know, maybe to our parents' generation, and maybe grandparents, the Hitler situation, whether or not we believe that in entirety or what's written, or the Stalin situation, still it was a very difficult time and people did lose their lives. And how does all that fit, Michael, with the world of perception versus what happened and what didn't happen?
Well, my take would be, again, if you look at the fact that we are by nature creators, and that creation gives no concern to what it is we're creating. You know, at the moment, you could imagine the creator. You know, you look at this awesome whole thing called life and the earth, just limiting it just to the earth here. And it's pretty awesome and pretty amazing. And I can easily imagine the moment at which the creator said to itself, well, you know, I've been running the show, you know, from the skunk to the fox to the fish. I got this whole thing going on, and I want something new, so I'm working toward building an instrument for something new and different. And Adamos comes on the scene. And I could imagine the moment where the creator says, okay, you know, I have done this whole thing and been in total control of it, and now I'm going to do something different. I'm going to turn control over to you. I'll give you an instruction, a 3-word instruction. Ask and you will receive. Now, I'm not going to correct you. I'm not going to fault you. I'm not going to discriminate against what you ask for. If you ask for terror and trauma and tragedy, then I will bring you terror and trauma and tragedy. You look at that line in the scriptures, it says, shall there be evil in the city and the Lord has not done it? There's only one functioning power in the universe. You know, if you get down to it, I mean, do you know how to raise your finger?
Do I know how to raise my finger?
Yeah.
Just lift it up, right?
Well, that's raising it. I didn't ask if you could raise your finger. I asked if you knew how to raise your finger.
Oh. No.
You don't have a clue. I mean, do you know what area of the brain, what brain cells has to fire to follow what muscles, what nerves, what signals, what's the voltage of the signals, what are the balances and the counterbalance for you to just do a little raise your finger? You and I don't have a clue, but there's something in us that does. And that something, I can easily imagine it saying, okay, so I'm going to turn choice over to you. You tell me what you want, and I'll bring it about. There is a pattern for what's best for you, and if you choose to be with that pattern, then your life is going to go really well. But if you choose to go against that pattern, then you're going to have some challenges and some difficulty. But I'm just going to bring about what you say you want. And then you look at how non-human minds in their hostility and fear reach out to brainwash others into hostility and fear. And, you know, you can easily, a good example, you probably remember, you know, you've done quite a bit of driving over the years. There was a time when you were driving somewhere, it was probably late in the night or maybe early morning, and you had your nice, quiet AM station on, the one that you have has that favorite, you know, kind of classical music, and you're driving along listening to your nice, quiet classical music, and all of a sudden, when you made this journey, there was one place, one corner that you would turn, or one highway that you would shift off of onto another one, and all of a sudden, your nice, quiet FM music disappeared, and you had this rock and roll noise come in. What happened? Well, there's a thing that happens with an AM radio where there's a control on the signal, and there has to be a certain percentage of signal strength in order for that signal to take over the circuitry in that radio, occupy it exclusively, and become the only station you're listening to. So if you imagine that as you're driving down the road, you're driving away from that station that has your nice, quiet music on it, and you get far enough away that the signal strength of that station drops, and you drive into the field of another station, and all of a sudden you're listening to this rock and roll raunchy noise. What happened? All that happened was the signal strength changed, and whatever had the strongest signal took over. You get enough minds in rage and guilt and fear and blame and sadness and hatred and vengeance and greed and grief. And when that signal strength becomes strong enough, it's going to take over every mind that has a potential of that, has that in their genes, has that energy within them, and it's going to tend to run their instrument, if we think of the body-mind unit as an instrument. If you listen to the physicist Yeshua, he referred to this very principle. And what he was trying to do, or what he was working toward, is getting enough people to understand the tools he was teaching, that they became the signal, or they participated in the signal that was designed for human beings, that was designed to radiate from our human created essence, which is love. And he said, and the world was pretty crazy, not much different than now, politically or any other way. You look at that story where, Peter asked Yeshua, how many swords should I bring? And Yeshua says, just bring one. And I can imagine that Peter, as many at that time, were thinking, we're going to have a Messiah. It's going to come and wipe out the Roman army, and we're going to be, on top again, and he's going to be the king. And he had no idea that the reason he allowed Peter to bring one sword, I can imagine Peter was pretty excited in that mindset, going, wow, I can't wait to see Yeshua wield this sword and wipe out the Roman army. Instead, Yeshua told him, after he struck out at the high priest's servant, told him, Peter, if you live by that sword, you will die by that sword. If that's the energy that you allow to resonate in you, and you will lash out with it, then that's the very thing that's going to kill you. And, as I see it, what the work of forgiveness, as Yeshua put it out, was about, was giving the people the tools with which they could delete the energetic patterns based in all forms of hostility or fear, and retain only energetic patterns based in love. Those who did that, when they reached critical mass, would together radiate an influencing energy, a signal, so to speak, like the radio station, that would impact every other mind on the planet. So he said, as a physicist, not a theologian, a little leavening leavens the whole loaf. It's only going to take a few people who live from that higher vibratory plane to bring that energy into their broadcast station, which would be their minds, and join with other minds broadcasting the same signal to produce a signal strong enough that it will obliterate the lower energy. Just like your FM station or your nice quiet music on your AM station was obliterated when you shifted the energy signal from one station to the other. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I've given some thought to what I see happening. Appreciate that, your thoughts, and we can see through history, at least what we can read of it, the times of where we see pockets of disruption in different areas, and then what we see as in the whole known world at the time, the disruption increasing and then waning. And we can just look at the last 100 years. We saw they were called world wars, but they were still somewhat localized, in my thought, to what we see today. today we're seeing the disruption on a way wider scale as I sense it. So where I would like to explore is, I talk to many people and I see people that are looking at the world scene and saying, oh, we have to, prepare because we're told, times are not going to be so great in the near future. And then I speak with folks that are just like, okay, they're oblivious. They don't want to focus any energy toward that. And I don't know if it's they don't want to consider it, or if they're consciously saying, I don't want to give any energy to it at all. I think the people that I sense is just that they don't want to deal with that and like life the way it is, and why consider anything different? So a question would be, is it, again, I think this is almost the same as the package delivery. Are we seeing a situation that's less than ideal? How are we going to react to it? And then what to do to prepare for a time that's less than ideal? Does that make any? That question that I presented, right?
Michael, if you're talking...
Excuse me, I was muted there. I'd hit my mute button there.
Right.
So my take would be that you've got to be careful where you source your information, because there are pockets and pods of information that can take us in 1,000 different directions, and many of those directions are there as options only because many minds are engaged in them. They're not actual and they're not true. For instance, on the topic of World War versus what's going on the planet right now, there's at least one group up in Canada that I touched into some of the research recently, and they study peace and war on planet Earth. And they're saying that, according to their studies, this is the most peaceful time that has been seen on planet Earth in thousands of years. And I forget exactly what the number was, but they had gone back and calculated from the beginning of scriptural time to today. And if I remember correctly, I believe that they, trying to remember what the number was, whether it was billion or trillion, that something in the range of 6 trillion people had been murdered in war on planet Earth over the last 6,000 years. And again, my number may be way off. It's been a while since I've read those numbers, so I don't remember exactly. But their conclusion was, this is the most peaceful time the Earth has ever seen, historically. And then if you look at some other statistics, like for instance, if we go back to the turn of the century, or even, let's say go to the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, more people are living with their food needs and their need for water satisfied than ever in history on a percentage basis. Of course, there are more people, but on a percentage basis, there are more people being fed, more people being well-fed, more people who have access to water, and instead of starving horribly ever in human history. And to me, what that speaks of is that there's a stronger field for people who are truly in empathy. Is there the terrorist? Is there the trauma? Is there the hate? Is there the vengeance? Yes. But overall, I think more people are devoting their resources to taking care of each other and taking care of the planet than any time in history, at least according to the numbers that I've seen. And oftentimes, those who put fear into people's minds, oh, you have to get ready. And I'm, one who says, always be ready for what could happen in your neighborhood tomorrow, or, from just, the local creek or whatever. Yes, obviously be aware and be prepared, but to buy into a fear-based prepper mind, I think, makes a contribution on an energetic level to bringing that to fruition. And of course, I document it from the work that I've done, that my take and what I've dedicated my life to is handing people who live in trauma and drama and pain and hate and fear and rage and guilt, and handing them tools to heal themselves individually and collectively. If I think back to the early days when I first started traveling 45 years ago, most people looked at me when I was talking about this stuff 50 years ago like, Mick, you are some kind of wacko. And, it was difficult to find places to present this kind of thought to any sizable audience. And what I've noticed, as time unfolded, I look back 20 years ago, and where even a little small burg that I would go through and had somebody who connected with my work and invited me, and, there was a little holistic healing center with a massage therapist and a doctor who did some modicum of natural healing in every little town and every little. 30 years earlier, that just wasn't true. So the evidence that I see is that we are on an uplift. Is there some crazy stuff going on? Yeah, I think there is a horrific threat right now in the world to women and children. And I think we need to be speaking up about that and doing something about it, and doing something about it from a space where if I have hostility or fear about it, I need to clean up my mind so that I am not a house divided against myself. Because if you listen to, it was actually back in, who was it? I believe it was Ronald Reagan's war-making chief, Department of Defense, and he wrote a book, which to me is a real symbol of the kind of turning point we needed to get to, and I think we hit that turning point just after the turn of the century. But this guy, and I think, what was his name? Weinberger, Wine something. I don't remember his exact name. But he wrote a book entitled Fight for Peace. I mean, you want to talk about an insane mind. You want to talk about a house divided against itself. Can you get much more divided against yourself than saying we're going to go fight for peace? It's crazy on its face.
We can resonate. Thankfully, we can process through that. Was it Caspar Weinberger?
Yes, Caspar Weinberger. Yep.
It just came.
Fight for Peace.
I didn't remember the book, but it kind of rang a bell when you mentioned that. Well, I appreciate those thoughts, Michael, and I do agree. Of course, there's a lot of very crazy things happening, and yet there are many groups, as I'm well aware of, and speak with, groups for regenerative farming, for regenerative agriculture, for
more than ever
placing the emphasis on protecting the earth as our home. And yes, that is. So yes, I agree. We have to be so cautious about the source of the information, and not act from a fear mind, as I believe you're saying, but to take part in these good programs.
Yeah, be aware of what you join with.
Well worthwhile adventure, right?
Yeah. Yeah, energetic joining is powerful. And what we join with, we strengthen, we empower. And of course, in Miracles talks about, what we see, we literally become part of creating it. And if I see something in the world that I think needs to change, and I'm in disturbance and upset about it, I better do my work first, or again, I'm a house divided against myself. Then, once I have done my work around it, or while I'm doing my work around it, because it's not an overnight event, and oftentimes there are many, many layers of the mind that need to be healed and cleaned up, that to the best of one's ability to work from the state of active love, taking responsibility for, when they said to Yeshua, what's most important in the law? And they're talking about human beings, and in essence, what I hear that question being is like, if you want to be a human being, what do you have to do first? What's most important? And again, in the Aramaic, the word law simply means the way it works. It's not the rule of a superior. It's not somebody standing up there with a big hatchet that says, I'm going to get you if you break my law. You can't break a law. It's not possible. I mean, it's a silly idea that you can break a law. You can break man's rules and regulations. See, the speed limit's 55, you can do 60. But that's not a law, that's a rule. A law is the way things work, and you can't break the way things work. Things work the way they work, whatever you do. And what happens is when people don't understand the way things work, like that first instruction Yeshua gave was have Rahma when you think of the Creator, when you think of neighbor, in order to maintain self. For upon this hangs the law and all its prophets. In other words, everything you want is based on this. And what does it mean? That I'm responsible, that I take responsibility for maintaining a condition of love in my mind so that my human beingness, my human presence is what fuels my human physiology. And when I have difficulty doing that, that's the time to pull out a worksheet and do my work and clean up layer by layer by layer by layer. And I'll just say that, acknowledging in terms of my own process that, spending more than 50 years developing this work, teaching this work more than full time for that long, that for me personally, some of the deepest work that I've done in my own personal process, my own inner challenges, has been in the last 2 or 3 years.
That's powerful. Wow. So this is amazing, and I listened to what you're saying. 50 years ago, people weren't open to these ideas, and neither was I. I was around. I was probably wrapped up in things that need to be, or maybe could have been doing better, and now there are people that are listening and that are waking. So instead of putting energies fighting what we think is not so good, creating these what some term is alternate. I think one of the terms people use alternate societies. I don't know if that's really a great term, but an alternate way of life maybe would be good. And the permacultures, the regenerative farming, getting back to our natural roots. Is
our caretaking posture on the earth. Yes.
Mm-hmm. What's good for the earth can be good for everyone. And when we were growing up, people used to make fun of the tree huggers. And now that's not only a good thing, it's so good on so many levels. We get grounding from it. That's our life. That's a great kind of a life-sustaining situation that tree is there
Exactly.
so we can breathe.
Yep.
It's just amazing how much it's some things are changing, and that really comes down to what you have mentioned many times. How did you refer to that as the numbers, the big shift that you had a term for it in the past?
Critical mass.
Critical mass. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, and we can't get like what the tree has to offer us as a creature, as a life form. We can't get from our perception or from our intellect. We've got to shut that thing off. We've got to step outside of that to step into the energy range. You know, if you talk in terms of physics, what we know of the energy frequencies on the planet, like, you know, science says 95% of the energy in the universe is dark matter. We don't know anything about it. It's that dark. We don't know anything. But we've got a whole society and a whole way of thinking and living that's built in this carbon-based memory system, the mind of man, as the scriptures described it, and this construct, this 9-bit mind that shows us everything that's consistent with what we put into this thing as purpose, as goals. And that's why the forgiveness process involves canceling goals, because it allows us to break loose of the errant parts of that system that has been in development for thousands of years, collapsing that and stepping into an energetic world that can feed us directly with its energetic influence. And we can come to direct knowledge of it rather than going through the mind. So, you know, when I appear to be in workshops and such tongue-in-cheek saying you got to be out of your mind, I'm actually being quite literal. Yes, if there's something your mind's got in the way of information that you need, go to it and get the information. But don't live there. It's not a good place to live. You know, it's such a fragmented, tiny, tiny, tiny segment. And if it's based in power person dynamics of hostility or fear, the only thing it's ever going to give you is evidence for hostility and fear. But stepping outside of it, you get to have a direct experience. And that direct experience will feed you. And there is an energy that Yeshua described called Ruka Dekudsha that will teach you, will give you every bit of information that you need. Your mind can't do that.
Yeah.
And we've been taught to rely on the mind. And, you know, the mind is the end-all and the be-all. And the truth is, the secrets are hidden by the mind, not in the mind. It's when we free ourselves from the mind that things change, that we become available to being fed by what the actuality is rather than stuck in this little tiny framework called self and the mind. So taking time to just be still and be quiet rather than, oh, I got to perform, got to get things done, do. No, take time to be. So important.
Which has been, you know, drilled into likely most of us since little children. Do, perform.
Yeah, well, it makes us good commercial servants.
Yeah. Boy.
You know, unfortunately, you know, there's a lot of research that shows that children, before they go to school, and, you know, there are wonderful, amazingly dedicated school teachers, but they are part of a system, and, you know, kids go to school and their imaginations are through the roof until they get through, and I don't remember exactly the numbers, through, you know, the first half of grade 1, grade 2, and all of a sudden that spiritual faculty plummets. And the system is structured to make of us good commercial servants.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. Drive all the creativity right out of us. And
there's no life in that. So forgiving that brainwash, removing that energetic dynamic, which is what the forgiveness process is about, is what allows us to return to that state that Yeshua spoke of what was the first law. There's this condition called Rachba. It's a gateway when it's open. Then you get to experience life as a human being. The world specializes in closing that gateway through hostility, fear, and blame. So everything that moves in the mind that's based in hostility or fear or blame, whether it's toward self or other or the big threat out there or whoever, whatever the boogeyman is that somebody believes in, that hostility, threat, or fear is an energy that's inside of us if we're experiencing it, and that's what needs to be faced and forgiven.
Mm-hmm.
So in that circumstance, we can actually be out of our minds, and then we're available for that eternal force in us that will teach us exactly what everything's about.
So it is comforting to know that we can help others to take part in some of these new programs and refocus our energies back to nature. And it brings me to, there's a wonderful quote that's coming to my mind, so if I can't recall it directly, I want to say Churchill, but it wasn't. It was along the lines of, if we see something, we see the world that we don't want, don't focus on that, create a new one. Does that
yes.
somewhat ring a bell?
Yeah.
I can't.
I know the quote you're thinking of. Yeah. Right. Rather than trying to build a world to go. That was actually Buckminster Fuller, if I remember correctly.
Yes, sir. That's it.
It was Bucky Fuller. So don't bother trying to beat that one down. Create a more attractive alternative.
Well, it's beautiful. It's wonderful to think about that and to be a part of it, a small part. And that.
Have you ever seen the movie Gandhi? Oh, go ahead.
No.
Go ahead before we go on to that other. So your homework assignment.
Mm-hmm.
Your homework assignment. Watch the movie Gandhi. Powerful, powerful. And, one of the things, and you see that all over the place that he said was, be the change you want to see in the world.
Be the change, yep.
But
beautiful.
But there's a scene in it, a powerful scene in it where, he's nearing the time when he's going to be murdered for his work. And he's in his ashram, and one of the reporters is talking to him about his great magnanimous presence in the world and what a difference he's making to governments and such and such and such. And Gandhi's kind of like, yeah, and I was just getting ready to go feed the goats. And in the world I live in right now, feeding the goats sometimes is more important than that kind of stuff. Ideas to that, it's like being alive where I am in the present moment is more important than accomplishing all the things that the world says need to be accomplished. The greatest contribution we can be is to be in the world as that space, fulfilling our purpose.
Wow.
But it's a powerful picture. The whole film is a powerful stand for living as a human being.
I remember reading about that, the reviews on it. That goes back quite a while, doesn't it? Just roughly?
Oh yeah, it's probably 30 years ago or so.
That's what I was thinking. It's been a while. I have to go back and see that. I'd say it's just comforting.
Yeah, it's a movie that we used to show just about every year at Heartland, and we haven't done Heartland since 2019. It's probably time to go back and look at it again, because they're just it's the energy of it. It carries, the way they put it together. It carries one into a space that's very powerful.
It's so comforting, so exciting to realize these things and to be a part. This is how we're going to be a part of the critical mass, I believe.
Yeah.
this continuous change.
Yeah.
So what? Mm-hmm.
So joining you in that process, my friend.
It's wonderful.
And I'm not sure that the type of, in his ashram, the type of farming that they did would be exactly permaculture, but it was very, what he did way back then was very oriented toward really taking care of the earth.
Mm-hmm. I remember being in the very remote areas of India and the farming they did. It was beautiful fields, the tea fields. Wow. They have a very nice system, but they also have the commercialized large portions also. So that's changing in that country, from my understanding.
Yeah.
They're realizing the mistakes that have been made. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the imperialists came in. There is this imperial mindset, a mindset of hostility, fear, possession, ownership, control, as opposed to a mindset of the presence of love. And that whole imperial mindset, you look at the number of lives that were destructively touched by the British Empire in their colonialism and some of the crazy stuff that was done. And they called it success. And unfortunately, that mindset is still alive and well. Just look where you're looking for someone playing the game of control, and there's hostility or fear, and bingo, there it is. Been going on for a long time, a mind without the condition of Rahma. First order of business.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Wow. Well, we certainly appreciate this time with you all, and I know you're on vacation, and still, we just so appreciate all of us that you're there for us, Michael and Jeannie and Tim, and it's really neat. You're in Branson right now, correct? Or in that area?
We're in Branson, Missouri right now. Yes.
Branson. My friend just told me their son is heading up there. He just came back from there 2-3 weeks ago, heading back up this week. So I think by the time he gets there, you're heading the end of the week over to Heartland.
Heading
right?
on, eh? Yeah, we'll be heading out then. So
tell the folks hello down there.
All right, we'll do it, sir.
Heartland. And thank you once again. It's been wonderful to speak with you today.
All right. Lots of love and blessings. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Awesome.
Have the best year.